Welcome, everybody, as you're wandering in the room, settling in. We'll give it a minute or two for people to file in and take their seats virtually. Okay, well, I don't see more people popping in, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming back to another one of our CCA Wednesday workshops. It's Fine Wednesday. Hope everybody is doing well. I'll be hosting this exciting presentation and discussion with Jenn Chang, who is joining us from the Harvard Kennedy School. She is the inaugural program director of the Culture and Civil Society Initiative there at the Kennedy School Center for Public Leadership. And she's going to introduce us to this initiative. We're going to hear all about it and hopefully have a vigorous conversation in the second half of the hour, if not earlier. So again, thank you all for coming. If you've got questions, when we get to the sort of open Q&A, you can always raise your virtual hand and talk live. And if you have questions along the way or even during that period, feel free to put them in the chat. I will be moderating the chat and make sure that those questions get delivered over to our speaker, Jenn, who can address them and have a great conversation. So without any more of having to listen to me, I'm going to turn the mic over to Jenn and have her take it away.
Thank you so much, Doug. And thanks to you and Joanna and Becca for running this whole series. And I think it's an incredible service to the field and to the folks who are on this call and others. And so very appreciative. And I hope to be a, first-time caller, multiple-time repeat listener later as we go. But it's really great to be here. Yeah, and I'm super excited to introduce the Culture and Civil Society Initiative here at the Harvard Kennedy School, which is rooted in the belief that culture is not just a reflection of who we are, but it's a force that can shape who we become as a democratic society. And so today I'm going to walk you through some very early vision, goals, progress, and stuff that we're thinking about. And then, yes, as Doug said, an exciting and robust conversation where you get to tell me all the things I'm doing wrong and all your feedback after that. But first, by way of just brief introduction, my name is Jenn. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a violist. I'm a public servant. I spent the past 4 years at the National Endowment for the Arts as the White House liaison and chief of staff. I'm an educator and a lifelong learner. And this is a photo from last February when we celebrated the life of my grandmother, my dad's mom, Dr. Diana Chang. She passed away recently at the age of 100, 4 days shy of her 101st birthday, and 3 weeks actually after my grandfather, Dr. Wen Chang, who passed at the age of 104. So people say, good genes, but also both of them were doctors, medical professionals who were trained in China, who emigrated to the US and built their family here in Boston. And much of their ability to gain a pretty quick foothold in a new country relied on their understanding of culture. They were intentional about teaching their children music. You can see my dad here, my brother there, our cousins as well. Intuiting that access and fluency to a nation's culture unlocked a lot else, including community, including a sense of belonging, including status. A quick way to understand and put yourself on an American dream ladder. This is my dad, brother, and cousin all playing together, celebrating my grandmother's memory and legacy. And for us as a family, it's through music that we can both provide space for solace and healing, honor our own family's memory and histories, share wisdom, share a common language that passes from one generation to the next, and connect to each other as a family in ways that, sometimes words aren't adequate for. So it's that spirit that brings me into this conversation today. So the Culture and Civil Society Initiative started just a few months ago in January of this year, which by Harvard standards is quite new. And it was started by a man named Anthony Fox, who is the former mayor of Charlotte, the former secretary of the Department of Transportation under the Obama administration. He also spent time as the chief policy officer at Lyft. He's trained as a lawyer, and now he serves as the Emma Bloomberg Professor of the Practice at the Kennedy School, as well as the Director for Public Leadership. That's a lot of things, but really it comes down to a deep policy expertise and a deep business expertise. So deep, in fact, that many people look at his background and they're surprised that he cares about this. But what I've really come to appreciate is that he comes at it from a perspective of this career in politics and policymaking. And with that conviction, he believes strongly that our political system, especially in the US, but elsewhere as well, doesn't have the ability to fix itself. And so he's looking outside, he's looking upstream, and we're looking to culture, very broadly defined, for the solutions that are going to help bring us as a society back and closer together. And for me, coming from sort of within the cultural sector for my whole life, it's important to have leaders like Anthony embodying the type of cross-sector perspectives and champions that we often search for, but he carries that in spades. So it brought him to found this initiative, which I just joined 3 months ago as the first and only person who's working on it. The timing for me was personally serendipitous, coming out of 4 years working in the Biden administration at the NEA. But also, I think the timing couldn't be more critical for the world. It's no secret that democracy across the globe is in crisis. Authoritarianism is rising, and trust in institutions is falling, all exacerbated by the proliferation of misinformation and accelerated by technological advances, including the rise of AI. This recent New York Times Siena poll illustrates the point that politics and policy making can't solve the divisions that we face, because first, it doesn't have the tools or mechanisms to do so, as we just talked about, but also doesn't have the public's trust. There's a deeper cultural fracturing happening here, which may only be solved with direct attention and remedies at that level. So when we talk about culture at this Culture and Civil Society Initiative, or CCSI, we think pretty broadly, which again was a learning point for me, coming from 4 years pretty deep into the arts and culture piece of it. So here we're talking about anything that helps us as individuals and as communities make sense of the world, help us express ourselves and connect to each other. So it certainly includes the arts and humanities, and that's our starting point. But also includes other sort of apolitical organizing mechanisms like sports, like religion, like food. And we also understand that culture to function in multiple ways. First, as a sort of a broad context for society or a community. Think about a culture of belonging, the culture of a workplace, the culture in the US versus in China, and which has sort of direct expressions. So a concert, a community mural project, the World Cup. If anyone's familiar with the Edward Hall's iceberg metaphor for culture, with direct expressions being sort of the visible parts of the iceberg and tied to a deeper set of beliefs and principles, that's basically how we're thinking about it as well. With, I think, another reminder point that's helpful for me to think about sometimes is that it's not inherently good or bad. In this open letter on the occasion of his 70th birthday, cellist Yo-Yo Ma wrote here that nature and humans as part of nature contain seeds of incredible creativity and terrifying destructiveness. And it's this capability that humans have, these seeds that we want to be helping policymakers and future leaders understand how to use positively. So what is CCSI? This initiative seeks to deepen understanding of the ways culture can positively shape national narrative, rejuvenate democratic societies, and combat polarization. So we help public leaders recognize and harness the role of culture in fostering democratic resilience. And we want to equip a new generation of leaders across sectors with the awareness and tools to use culture as a bridge and for other positive societal impacts. This means integrating culture into public problem solving and civic leadership education. So how are we thinking about doing this at the Kennedy School? And please forgive my small font theory of change here. Um, the Kennedy School is a place that's known much more for technical expertise and solutions than arts-infused, sort of experiential, outside-the-box learning. But it is also a campus that's filled with creative people for students, whether or not it's students or faculty or staff. Many of these folks currently hold their creative and professional lives far apart, as I have much experience doing as well as a musician and someone who used to work in the tech industry. And I think part of our job here is to bring those things closer together. My general sentiment is that for many professions, it's great, it's fine to sort of charge down two different paths, to charge down your artistic, creative self, as well as charge down your professional life. But if your actual job as a policymaker is to create systems and influence systems for other people to live in addition to yourself, you should you should have a deep and fluid understanding of how the things that you do in your day job affect the things that you care about and the ways you express yourself, and be able to sort of project that out to the folks that you're doing policymaking with and for. So our approach centers on 4 pillars. First, campus programming and activations, these culture-based quick activations that bring students into community and cultural proximity. As we do these, we pair them with critical dialogue and sort of take their analytical brain and turn it with and for the creative culture-based activation that they're experiencing. So basically, that's a long way of saying it's not just that you're having fun at a concert, it's also thinking about why you're enjoying this, how it's functioning in society, what are the impacts of it, and sort of getting into the practice of looping those things together, even when you feel like you're on your off fun time. The second thing is classroom education. We're working on courses, workshops at all sort of different levels, trying to get some of this more formally into classroom education. Third, research and case development, capturing what works, why, ability eventually to share and scale that way. And then finally, practice and thought leadership, thinking about ways that we can sort of impact people and things on campus, but then also contribute to a national public dialogue. So we think that all of these things taken together will set up the Kennedy School as a hub for a different kind of public leader, different conception of what public leadership is, with a deep understanding and appreciation for the ways that culture can function in and around policymaking, both as context for the decisions that they're making, as well as equipping them with direct culture-based interventions. So already in the year 1, which is really actually just the past 2 to 3 months, we've laid some important groundwork. And I think a lot of our strategy for this coming couple of months revolves around pilots. So quick iteration and doing a lot of stuff, quickly testing things and seeing what works. And just briefly, in this first bucket here, in this programming section, we're helping to work with the arts and public life student caucuses. So sort of directly working with the student groups that already exist on campus, building from what we have. The student arts and culture and public life caucus, for example, grew from 2 people last year to 150 people this year. And that's with, helping them as much as possible to do that work. The folks who are already, on board with this way of thinking. One of the example here with this outdoor concert is we brought a bunch of students to an outdoor orchestra concert at the Hatch Shell in Boston on the Esplanade, and I think people had a good time. It was like 103 degrees, so it wasn't the most pleasant weather, but people had a good time, and then had a picnic, and then also had a prompt card for them that was like, okay, you're having a good time at this orchestra concert. Look around you. What is this? First of all, this big public structure exists. There's also funding that's going into like bathroom maintenance and security and sort of all the things. Like, what does that mean about the values and beliefs that the leaders of the city of Boston had in the past to create this structure and then have currently. And so it's sort of stuff like that that I was mentioning earlier that kind of ties the experience to the analytical in ways that hopefully, if we keep doing it over and over again, we'll have some impact. On the classroom education front, we have a couple of things. One of them is these workshops that are open to any Kennedy School students. One of them for the past couple of years has been taught that's led by an opera singer, and it's called Finding Your Authentic Voice. It's Carla Canales. And that's something that we've been helping to support, as well as there's going to be a class of the Ed School, the School of Education, that invites Kennedy School students to cross-register. And that's sort of, again, just getting things out into the water through that channel. In the research and case development side, Anthony just spent a bunch of time working on a case about school integration and busing in Charlotte. And again, this is an introduction to Kennedy School students about a different way of thinking about a public problem, examining the ways that the community group in Charlotte that had no formal authority was able to understand the culture of that place, the culture of that community, the culture of that situation, and leverage it such that to leverage it to turn the tide towards successful school integration through a busing system that, if you look at Boston as a counter example, none of that was a foregone conclusion. The success of Charlotte's case was not a foregone conclusion based on the technical policy pieces that were in place. And I think I've heard a bunch of feedback from students already that as they've been taught that case, that it helped them to understand differently, like what the levers are and what the applications are of culture into public policy challenges. On the field sort of and the practice and thought leadership front, we brought together in September a national sort of think tank convening of cultural leaders and spent a full day reimagining the future of public support for culture in the US, of which Doug was a very helpful participant. We actually just finished the notes, a long series of notes from that that we can make available if that's helpful to folks. But I think that again is a way that we have started to express our work. So with each of these, we're asking questions and testing out hypotheses, figuring out what works, what's building momentum in the right ways, what things we will never try again because it was too much work, stuff like that. And again, the goal is not necessarily to increase the number of cultural policy people or people who would consider themselves cultural policy folks. It's to build a deeper understanding of the roles of culture in policymaking and future public leaders across all disciplines, so that when they go into being diplomats or city planners or housing policy folks at any level, they can consider cultural approaches and perspectives as quickly as they do economic and technical ones. So I'm just going to go through two sort of examples of things that we've started and the way I'm thinking about it, and then we'll open for questions. But first, this Culture in Action series, really testing out the question of how can we build on what's already here. And so like many campuses, there's incredible depth of sort of arts-minded folks, including arts and public life-minded folks across all the different schools. And so one of my questions that I was hoping to test out is what does partnership look like across campuses? How can we both build at the programmatic level and then also bring students together who are from come from different perspectives. And so this is the first thing we launched here, a cross-university speaker series hosted with the Undergraduate Office for the Arts. The most recent event that we held that you can see at the top here was with Deborah Rutter, the former president of the Kennedy Center, who's now at Duke University. And the inaugural one that we had in September was with Chair Jackson, Maria Rosario Jackson, the former chair of the National Endowment for the Arts. And I think what we're learning from this is generally validation. I think the second event that we hosted with Deborah Rutter, we had, I don't know if you can see here, but 4 students from the Graduate School of Design, the Graduate School of Education, undergrad, and the Kennedy School, all both on the panel with her and also asking her questions. And unsurprisingly, that then like drew a very multi-campus, cross-campus kind of group of folks into the room. And you can kind of like see in real time the people being like, oh, look, I had no idea there are so many people who also cared about advocacy and sort of the ways that the arts and culture can exist in public life, and sort of just thinking more broadly about what the functions and roles of culture and the arts are in public life. And so building that kind of cohort across different schools and building excitement I think is going to have a lot of benefits. I think in next semester we'll do some more hands-on work in that way, including with Emily Ruddock, who's the executive director of Mass Creative, and starting to look at direct advocacy work as well as sort of career trajectories and stuff like that. So that's been a rich and fun thing to do. And then I mentioned this cultural field convening, which again, just thinking about what questions we're bringing to each of these things as we're launching them, as we're piloting. This one is really about what the Kennedy School can contribute to a national cultural dialogue, especially in the public sector, which is facing a whole lot of existential challenges right now. And I think, we were able to prove a couple of things, including the role of universities and academia very broadly as resources, connection to expertise across sectors, as conveners, as providing a protective place, as a convening place for people to get outside of their day-to-day, think a little bit differently, think together, build connection. So that was really great. And I think one of the next steps that we're exploring there is one of the folks that we brought to speak with this group is Marshall Gantz, who's an expert in community organizing and has a background in field organizing and movement building. And so we're looking at ways that he and his team can continue engaging with artists and cultural workers. So just very briefly, not going to narrate through this whole slide, but really, we're hoping to see a lot of things in this first year. Again, thinking both about students at the Kennedy School, broadly at Harvard, and then also in the public, hoping to get a lot of touch points and engagement and building, and then learning from the reactions and the feedback that we're hearing. So I think that's the end of my formal presentation, but really just wanted to invite you all to be part of this, whether as a partner or as a collaborator or a continued sort of feedback loop. I think engagement across schools, across places, across as much as possible, building networks of this kind are going to be extremely helpful. So I'm also really excited to act as a resource and bring whatever we can at Harvard to a broader conversation that we know has been going on much longer than the existence of this particular couple-month-old initiative. But really looking forward to working with all of you on some of this stuff.
All right. Thank you, Jen. Thank you. And I want to just comment, I guess, to start, a personal thank you for including me in that meeting that you had a few months ago and hosted at Harvard. It was an amazing gathering of people, and I think a testament to this initiative and its power and potential to really help move things along and make some change. It was a great gathering, and I think the ability to get people out of their silos, their routines, their lanes, in a sense, and what they do on a day-to-day basis, and get us to start cross-fertilizing and mobilizing and things is hard to do. It's hard to do for good reasons, and so efforts to do it, I think, have a lot of promise. So I appreciate that, Jen. All right, so let's talk more. Let's get more dialogue here, and I'm going to start off by instead of my usual of me asking a question or two, I'm going to postpone that, and because we've got Veronica already put something in the chat, and so I want to make sure you have a chance to see this. She's asking you if you have any suggested readings or books to help learn more about the cultural policy and this foundational work that you're doing. She's looking for ideas to curriculum build. So that's a heavy question right off the bat.
That's
But if you
great.
have if you have some sort of reading content in mind, plug it now and then plug it again when it comes to you later in 20 minutes also. But do you have anything that comes to mind immediately?
A couple of things come to mind. First, I see that Andrew came off video mute, and happy to plug his book, which I had on my bedside table for a long time until the library crossed whatever, like interlibrary loan called it back. And so, thanks, Andrew, for your. If you want to put the info for your book here and talk about it for a second, feel free. I also looked to Chair Jackson's work, Maria Rosario Jackson, and I'm gonna totally not remember the name of there's a book in which she wrote like a chapter that synthesizes a lot of the kernels of what we then were able to express through the art, through the National Endowment for the Arts, that's centered on two sort of principles. One of hers is this theory of artful lives and trying to allow everyone to, treating everyone as a person who contains the seeds of creativity, and then also trying to then um, create policies that allow for everyone to lead artful lives. And then also that's sort of like from the individual outward perspective, and then the arts integration, like because of this also needs to be structural. So let's talk about policies that, and this kind of guided our work at the National Endowment for the Arts, that was very intentional in partnering across literally as many federal agencies as we possibly could. But that's some of the things that guide our work. Andrew, you want to talk for a minute about, thank you for putting the actual title in here.
Hi Jen, hi everyone. This is also exciting. I had a project with Tom Borup, who I think just joined the call, called Democracy as Creative Practice, and it's a series of artists' reflections on the way that their work engages with questions of democracy and civic life, and it also is kind of an ongoing event series of ways to talk about that in public with folks, and some of you have been at those events, and Tom is on, so maybe Tom wants to say hi.
Oh, hi. I don't,
I put you on
You're
the
on.
spot.
That's great. I will say, I think neither of these perspectives there's also sort of like mm, perspectives about sort of like what is the history of what formal arts policy has looked like in the United States. I guess that also is relevant, but I think only a piece of the puzzle. And I'm talking about like, if you think about the history of the budget of the National Endowment for the Arts, like it was $207 million last year. Where did that come from? What is the history since 1965? Like there's that parts of it as well. I don't, yeah, I think Andrew and Maria, and also my view, that's just a piece of the puzzle when we talk about what cultural policy in the US especially looks like.
Okay, so let's keep this moving forward. I had a question, and then I see Michael Rushton post a question in the chat, and it weirdly aligns with my question, but I want to ask it in a different way, and then I'll circle back to Michael's phrasing. You had a slide early on about how sort of culture isn't good or bad, and it is what it is, and I kind of start wondering how you think about how much sort of culture is responsible for some of the maybe bad trends we've been seeing lately. And is this an effort to sort of fight fire with fire and use culture as a force for good when culture may not be? So anyway, that's part of this vague question, and I just need to give you a long runway with. But then I think it's actually really related to what Michael put in the chat, which is that Trump 2.0 has brought changes to the NEA, Smithsonian, and so on. And he would, I think, boldly phrase it as efforts by public leaders to create change through the arts, positive change in his chat. Should this give us pause? So I'm sort of thinking, how would you reconcile, how do you think about a sort of culture and a culture wars sense, and it being sort of forces for positive and who's positive and all of that? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think first I would love to open this up to broader conversation, because I'm certainly not in this room in particular. Everyone I think has something, perhaps something, a perspective to share here, because I don't think anyone is the expert on this necessarily. But I think just briefly, Yeah, I mean, it's much easier to destroy and to harm and to um, demolish trust and sort of the things that we're building than it is to build, right? And so I think culture is, I don't want to be too instrumentalist about culture coming from, my lifetime as an artist and whatnot. And sort of, I think there's room to hold both of those things, but I think it's much more difficult to understand the ways that the positive applications can work. And I think, to Michael's point, this current administration has a much better handle on what dominant culture looks like and sort of how to manipulate it and use it. I don't think they draw quite they're good students of history. They're like the tactics and tools that they've been using are textbook, playbook from other eras and other times. And I think the harder part of it is the thing that we all need to be studying the ways to turn the tide, looking at the sort of broader cultural fabric. But I think the bigger point is that it's not only a political discussion. It's not only a policy making technical solutions discussion. It's what are the best leverage points and most both at the local and state and national levels here that we can be deploying and employing all at once. Curious what others think about this, though.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I'm curious what others think as well. I mean, this kind of question is, it's rough to put Jen on the spot with it, but it's pretty central to a lot of what I think many of us have been thinking about for the last several months. So I suspect some of us have some thoughts, and Jen has opened it up to share. So I want to underline that. If you want to share those thoughts, please feel free to chime in.
Michael, Hugh, I did have a question in the chat, but otherwise, I guess I would look at the historical record, and maybe there's some collaborations at the university or at the Kennedy School. I mean, I think if you look at the Cold War period, there was an attempt to use, state control and censorship of culture, and actually the West's value add was that we did not do that. And so I think there's a question about, does that playbook actually work in the historical record, or is it something that is often attempted but tends to be a poison chalice?
Nice point, Michael. I want to spin on that with sort of this idea of state control of culture, state role in articulating, advancing, manipulating, shaping, all that piece. It's actually the university role as well, as hosting and convening things, but also being the home of an initiative like this. Jen, I wonder what you think. So when we gathered a few months ago at Harvard, I think it was an interesting gathering, in part because there was this idea that universities are particularly well positioned to host sort of common ground types of conversations that can get people from other walks of life together. And then it became a nice meeting space. But the university world is certainly implicated in the current culture wars as well, and does not have a great reputation of being neutral in a lot of these sorts of conflicts. So what do you think about any of that? The response to Michael, the response to this new provocation I tossed out, other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are sort of disconnected thoughts, but one, before, I think every so often there's sort of a call to, at the federal level, thinking about, why doesn't the U.S. have a Ministry of Culture, and sort of like having a cabinet secretary for culture. And I don't know that I've ever been strongly on that train, but I think this past couple of months has made me very seriously question the idea behind that and sort of like what that would open us up to even more. And so that's just going to throw that out there, staring at Michael Rushton's question. I think, yeah, but yeah, I think on the university front, I guess, so I have been in and around schools and universities for a long time, but this is my first like 3 months working at one. And so I have the advantages of sort of like insider, outsider or new kind of perspective, I guess, to what some of these longstanding dialogues have been. And I would just say, the yeah, it's attention grabbing, and there are a lot of headlines and everything, but I think though thus far I've been really happy and pleased about sort of the multitude of perspectives I've been able to hear and be exposed to on campus, the general level of sort of like normal student enthusiasm and sort of like looking to it just like feels very nice. Actually, it's stressy on campus right now because it's midterm season, but it's like that kind of stuff that um students are stressed out because of midterms is not a headline, but it's nice to be able to feel some of that like daily, everyday energy that's still going despite the existential sort of like what you read in the news about it. And so I think holding both of those things and sort of staying focused on like what one like the both championing the place and doing what we can from like an event based like a moment to moment level of keeping that commitment of the diversity of perspectives and ability to do the things like what we did last month with a whole bunch of people, while also sort of being aware of the context, I think is the best we can do at the moment. But I have not been deterred thus far from the university as neutral-ish convener, and especially I think it's an especially important function. We at the NEA also thought of ourselves as sort of a convener, a neutral convener in not dissimilar ways. And so when we brought together, for example, the Healing, Bridging, Thriving Summit, it was with a particular perspective, obviously, but it was also like had the convening ability across the country, and sort of the neutrality is not the right word, but sort of like the ability and sort of pull to do that around a particular set of policy, illuminating a set of policy ideas. Without access to any of that kind of space at the federal level, I think there's a bigger void in the ability to do that kind of thing than there had been in previous administrations. And so I think the need is greater, for multiple reasons.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate that sort of insider-outsider perspective. And I love the idea that even at Harvard, especially at Harvard, you're getting some normalization. I think anyone who's following the headlines is sort of craving some normalization sometimes. So, well, good for them for the stress about midterms. I think that's a great sign. So, and I also want to encourage people again to follow Michael Feldman's example and join in this conversation. And I'm going to, lacking anyone else raising their hand at the moment, I'm going to turn over to Michael's prompt he put in the chat, asking about whether you're connecting with cultural institutes elsewhere, maybe around the world, using, sort of as a recovering cultural attaché and policymaker. What are your thoughts on sort of more collective, these other collectives on cultural diplomacy and how you're integrating that in with your initiative or plan?
I'm very open to it, and I would love to connect with you to learn more about it. And I think Carla is in China right now, but I think when she gets back, we'll talk sort of deeply about like strategies for that. I think that's an absolute aspiration, but haven't had time yet to put meat on the bones there.
Good. So I wanted to continue. So one of the other parts I really liked about your presentation, your pitch, your vision for this initiative is that it might begin with sort of arts and humanities, but it's not contained there. And I think it can sprawl bigger. It's about meaning making and connections, and that goes beyond. And I think the boundaries and bounding of all of these kinds of efforts are really interesting to me personally. And I'm always amazed at how exclusive the arts and cultural space can try to portray itself and really actively fight to be. And I think there's really good reasons for it, but also consequences, right? And so it's interesting when you bring in like sport as something else. You mentioned the World Cup coming in. Like, there's a lot of interesting opportunity there. Maybe sport, I think in the next year we will start seeing is as sort of politically corrupted as anything. we may be just left with food by the end. I don't know. But what do you, as sort of a safety politicized space, but what do you think about the potential for going to sort of arts adjacent or other sort of cultural manifestations as opportunities for the kinds of work you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to say by the end of this year, that might be too aspirational, but I hope by the end of this academic year, we'll have launched sort of some of the other pillars of what we're talking about and really started to make some headway with, I think sports is shaping up to probably be our next pillar there. I remember very distinctly, like someone came to a meeting at the NEA, some like all staff meeting, and the first thing they talked about was like, I love the arts because of how similar to sports it is. And everyone, like as arts people, are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that comparison was even like mentioned. So I consider myself from that school of thought where that is a surprising thing to talk about, but I have also then gotten myself past that being a surprising thing to analogy to make or comparison to make. But it takes work because of how much, defense, like time and effort and energy we've poured into sort of this, or at least myself, speaking for myself, like a craft and sort of like the preciousness that we've put around it. But yeah, not to diminish all of that, but also to see it in a little bit of a broader way, has been an ongoing learning journey for me. But I think it's ideally helpful, a helpful way to understand some of these, again, like when we're thinking about them purely as societal mechanisms. So yeah, I think one of the some of what also I'm working on is both driven by folks, professors and faculty at the Center for Public Leadership who I sit near and have interest and access to. So for example, there's a professor here who is doing some negotiation work with the Celtics, and he's like, hey, I have this really cool idea about like how we can think about sports in XYZ kinds of ways, right? And so I think, if that works out, that's probably something we'll start illuminating, incorporating into film series, sort of like, and starting to, again, really just like test out and get in the water there. Joanna? Hi, Joanna.
Hi, I apologize. I'm about to board a plane, but I wanted to ask a question.
Great.
So you might hear some announcements. So I wanted to know what you think, your perspective on how important it is regarding where a paradigm changing initiative such as this comes from. So, I mean, you're coming from higher ed, the most elite institution, and we also see movements build from grassroots, ground up types of initiatives. We also see movements build within the federal government. I think actually, if you look back on the history of cultural policy and any structures or systems that have been put in place, they've all really come from federal government. I mean, there's some, I think, here and there that perhaps have come from foundations and philanthropy, but I think, the major structures we know to be cultural policy have really sort of formed from within federal government. So I guess I'm wondering, how influential do you see this type of initiative being, given that it's coming from somewhere else? And how does an initiative actually gain traction when it's not coming from the top down, which is kind of what we've seen historically?
Sure. So, I mean, I think a couple of things. One, well, I'll talk about it this way first. So when we first thought about hosting this like 60 people from across, cultural leaders from across the country, the initial objective was like, okay, there's a different political party in power right now. Like, what would it look like to create a Project 2030 for arts and culture? Basically, like everything's a mess now. What would it look like if we had like basically prepared a policy playbook to like plop down on someone's desk in 3 to 5 years and then have it be implemented? And that's totally something I saw work in the previous administration, and that I drew inspiration from and thought was interesting, and well, that was sort of one of the goals we had been testing out, actually, about like bringing that group together. But through we did participant interviews ahead of time. Sort of through some of that discussion and dialogue, the focus started shifting. I think one, because very frankly, we don't know what the tools for policymaking will look like in 3 to 5 years. We don't, I mean, every day there's additional destruction, sort of dismantling of the mechanisms of how the government works, and like, will we be in a place in a couple of years that we would be able to receive something like that? It would be able to receive something like that. And so that's, a question. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be working on it, but that question was brought up more times than that, sort of testing out where the energy of that group was. That's sort of the question marks around that were very present. And the other thing is, I think I would say, yeah, instead of that, I think a lot of folks went towards building up of a better networked cultural sector, and cultural sector, not just those who are sort of professionally would define themselves as being like professionally in a cultural sector, but really folks who intrinsically care about the arts and culture and the ways that they can function in society. So I think in first, even like the loosening of like what even is the cultural sector, there's like a lot of definitional and sort of like identity work to be done within that group, and then plus the better networked version of it. I mean, I think networking and organizing was much more of the spirit of where that group was taken. And I think that to your question of like how influential can something be from the outside, I think first, if we and all of us sort of like practice and get better at recognizing each other's work, recognize each other as colleagues across as artist colleagues, all sort of like on the same page about a couple of things. Doesn't need to be everything, but it's a couple of things, including like sort of core beliefs and vision, sort of like what the arts and culture can be in a new vision sort of for the arts and culture. I think that would be a helpful thing to happen in the next couple of years. And from where it comes from, I think ideally everywhere that's besides the federal government, I think the strengthening of that network becomes critical. Very practically, we don't have access to the work at the federal government level at this moment. So what is it? What's the most we can do without that access, I think, is to part of your question. And then I might also, want to think pretty hard about when you talked about like when a paradigm shifts, where does the initiative come from? I think sometimes some of the technical solutions come from the federal government, but I think there's like movement building, there's community engagement, there's a lot of elements, sort of more cultural community-based elements of it before and around the technical policy shift that builds towards it or builds around it. And so I think there's a lot of that work that we can be doing.
Super helpful. And I guess just one follow-up is, I'm wondering if you have examples from when you were at the NEA of something like a movement building or, a paradigm shifting initiative that came from the outside that then the NEA considered to be, something that they were going to pursue.
Sure. I'm trying to think of.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No,
if you
no,
don't, that's fine.
It's good. I was just joking with a former colleague of mine, being like, "What did we do there?" It's all such a blur. No, I think one of the things that I don't know if this is the clearest example, but when we thought about the Healing, Bridging, Thriving Summit, for example, really a lot of it was about an impulse towards arts integration that sort of it's the origins of some of that work were from Art Place America, and sort of it drew from a lot of histories of people who are already sort of interested in this in creative placemaking and arts intersection with other areas of policy and practice, and sort of a field. It drew from quite a big field of folks and a history of folks who had already been working at these issues for a long time. So I would say that a lot of what we did, the NEA, first of all, was not in a bubble. I think the place is set up relatively well to have ear to the ground about what a lot of communities are interested in and thinking about. But I think the ways that we then expressed it were, I would say hopefully much more of an expression and sort of implementation of a lot of what people had been hoping for over time than something that we just randomly thought of and sort of then implemented top down, if that makes sense. That's what we hoped it seemed like, but that was the intention. I think another example is the Arts Here program that we were certainly prompted to do it by the administration, and they basically said, like, day one, racial equity executive order, like, don't do the same thing you've always been doing. You need to do something new and big, and sort of so we had that sort of like wind in our sails for implementing that program. And yet when we had a blank sheet of paper and we were like, okay, what should we do? We didn't invent something completely from scratch. We said, okay, like, what are the best practices? How far can we move this institution that has a lot of things, restrictions placed on what we can invent? So basically we Ayanna Hudson and I took a clean sheet of paper and like, okay, what are like the best practices in progressive philanthropy right now? It's about like general operating support. It's about individual artists. It's about sort of like what is our like sort of what we understand to be community-based ways of progressing what philanthropy is. And then how do we match that with what the NEA can actually do? And so that process took like a year and a half. It took a really, really long time just internally to then, and not always cordially trying to figure out how to get there. But that's sort of some of the genesis of what that program looked like as well.
Great. Sharon.
Hi, thank you. I'm looking at this from outside of the US, and I just have a question about the support for culture in the United States. What role do the state funding bodies play, as well as the large philanthropic organizations? Are they a possible access for perhaps launching some of the initiatives that you're hoping to initiate in the absence of support from the federal government? I have to say that we're quite alarmed to see what's happening there, but I won't go into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we're gonna have the highest chance of success of sort of preservation of the parts of these institutions that are important and that we care about is banding them together and sort of standing united. And I think, again, it's a strategy that this administration is using, as well as other previous ones, to sort of like separate, like each institution is weaker as an individual than if there's a collective agreement, right? So I think that works. That is true across cultural organizations. It's true across universities. It's true across a lot of philanthropic organizations. But also, it would be even better if all of them could be networked and sort of in lockstep and coordinated, at least, to provide the largest united front. So yes, I hope that works, but it is above my understanding to figure out how exactly.
Thanks for that question, Sharon. We are approaching the end of the hour. We've got time for someone else to jump in with the last question, if you'd like. It's been an interesting conversation for sure, and it's great to be introduced to this new initiative coming from that Jenn is overseeing, coming out of Harvard, and with some big aspirations and takes a big brain to wrap one's head around it, I think, which is actually perhaps exactly what we need right now, is thinking a bit bigger about a lot of these kinds of challenges. So are there any other last words someone wants to get in? Not seeing. All right, well, let's take a moment then to thank Jenn for coming to visit this workshop, and thank you all for attending. Thank you, Jenn. This was great, much appreciated. And it's wonderful to see all the connections that your presentation is making to our other presenters and other people in the room. This is a sign of network and sort of coalition building and all of this. We're living the dream. And so I'm thankful for everybody for being part of this and helping to contribute. We'll see you all in 2 weeks back here again for our next workshop, as I check my calendar to make sure I'm not misleading you. Yes, it'll be the morning time, 9 a.m. Eastern presentation in 2 weeks' time. I'll see you all then. Take care.
Thank you so much. Great to see you all.
Thanks, Jenn.